The storm rolled across the high plain and shouldered Ash Hollow like a black river. The wooden town sign rocked on its post. Rain hit in cold slabs that stung the face and flattened the grass. The stagecoach lurched. Harness jingled. Mud climbed the wheels until the driver pulled up at the last turnoff and shouted that he could go no farther. Clara Whitmore stepped down with a satchel and a ruined wedding dress. The lace clung to her like weed in a stream. She pressed one hand to her ribs, the other to a small silver pocket watch in her skirt pocket. The metal bit at her palm. The case was engraved with tiny vines and a sentence. Time circles back. She set her jaw and followed a wagon trail that cut toward a line of cottonwoods. Water ran in the ruts. The wind shoved her sideways. A hoofprint filled, overflowed, vanished. Her hair stuck to her cheek and tasted of salt. She walked until the trail rose and the cottonwoods opened and a valley spread below, cupped by low hills and sharp blue mountains far off. Juniper Ridge Ranch sat in the center like a fist. A long barn, a low house with a wraparound porch. 2 lanterns burning in front windows made 2 warm coins against the dark. She reached the gate and gripped the wet wood. Her knees shook. The hem of the dress was brown with clay. She smoothed her hair useless and climbed the steps. Her knuckles rapped once. Thunder answered. She knocked again. The door swung back on a bar of warm light. A man filled the frame, tall and broad through the shoulders, his dark hair cut close gray at the temples. His face was lined in a way that made the lines look earned. He did not blink at the sight of her. He took her in head to toe, and then met her eyes. "I am Clara Whitmore," she said. Her breath came in little clouds. "From the letters." He shifted aside and motioned her in. "Get out of that weather," he said. His voice was low, sanded down by a life of not using it much. Heat rolled from the hearth. The room smelled like wood smoke and iron and a trace of coffee. The floorboards had been scrubbed pale. The furniture was sturdy. Nothing frilled. Nothing wasted. A rifle hung over the mantel. The rain on the roof softened to a steady drum. He left and came back with a basin and folded cloths. "Sit," he said, nodding at a chair near the fire. He crouched and looked at her torn knee. "May I?" She nodded. His hands were large, rough from rope and fence wire, but they moved with a careful habit that belonged to another job. He rinsed the cut and picked mud out with the corner of a cloth. The water pinked, then went clear. "It is not deep," he said. He wound a strip of linen around her leg, tied a neat square knot that lay flat and clean. "You will be sore." "Thank you," she said. The room tilted. She steadied herself with the chair. "Are you Elias Mercer?" "I am." He stood and gestured to a door off the main room. "There are clothes in there," he said. "My sister-in-law's. They may fit." He glanced at her dress and then away. "Leave the wet things by the stove." The small bedroom smelled of cedar and soap. On the dresser lay folded cotton dresses, a riding skirt, a plain nightgown. She peeled the ruined lace from her skin teeth, clenched as fabric tugged the bandage, and slid into a blue work dress that fell correct at the ankle and made her feel less like a ghost. She set the silver watch on the nightstand where the lamplight caught and held on it. The engraved line flashed, "Time circles back." When she came back, he was at the stove with a cast iron pot. The lid clinked as he lifted and set it down. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and placed one in front of the chair. The spoon was warm. Steam smelled of venison and thyme. "Eat," he said. She took a bite and felt the burn of heat and hunger together. The stew was simple and perfect. She had not meant to finish the bowl. Then she looked down, and it was empty. "Good," she said. He nodded. That was all. They ate in the sound of the rain and the pop of sap in the logs. A clock ticked somewhere slow and steady. Her eyelids grew heavy. He rinsed the bowls in the basin, set them to dry, and handed her a folded blanket. "You can take the small room," he said. "I will be in the other." "Thank you," she said. The words felt small. There were bigger words that did not fit yet. He inclined his head. She carried the blanket back. In the hall, she passed a narrow door, half open on a study. Shelves along one wall held books with worn spines, mechanics, irrigation, a slim volume of Whitman with a torn paper jacket. On the desk lay a square of drawing paper with graphite smudges and a brass compass. A rolled vellum plan was tucked into a wooden tube. The top had been burned with a neat stamp. 1873, diversion gate. In the main room, she paused at a small shelf. A frame lay face down there. A thin crack ran along its edge. She did not turn it over. She slept a little, then woke in the dark to the room breathing, and the storm changed. The rain had softened to a sift. She swung her feet to the floor. The boards were cool. She drank from the tin cup water, metallic and sweet. On her way back, she saw him through the front window, a shape on the porch chair, tipped boot crossed over boot. He was a silhouette with the lantern behind him. A faint light glowed in his hands. A watch case curved. He pressed it, and a thin melody lifted and trembled over the porch boards. A lullaby simple and exact as a diagram, more ache than sweetness. The hair on her arms rose. It matched the tune that slept in the silver weight on her nightstand. She stepped to the doorway and leaned on the frame. He did not look over, not at first. He watched the rain with the patient look of someone who has learned not to rush water. The song wound down and clicked to silence. He closed the lid and set the watch on his knee and let it sit there. After a time, he spoke, still looking out. "You came far." "Far," she said. There was no point saying more. The mud on her calves, the cut on her knee, the ache in her shoulders said the rest. His mouth tightened a little, not unkindly. "Juniper Ridge is not Philadelphia." "I did not come looking for Philadelphia." He turned his head, then only enough to put one eye on her. It was dark and steady. The porch light cut a plane along his cheek. He seemed to weigh something and find the number he needed. He tapped the lid of the watch with one knuckle. "Bring yours to breakfast," he said. She felt the cold circle of the case against her thigh, though it lay on the nightstand inside. She looked past him at the valley. The rain drew silver threads across the grass in the lantern light. Somewhere a horse stamped and blew. The scent of wet earth came up strong and clean. He stood and pocketed the watch and went inside. The door clicked shut behind him, gentle in his hand. She stayed long enough to let the porch boards cool her bare feet, then went in and closed her door and lay on the narrow bed. The blanket was coarse. The pillow smelled faintly of sun. In the quiet, she heard the house settle and the stove tick as it cooled, and the slow metronome of the wall clock. Her pulse answered it and slowed. Her eyes went to the small silver circle on the stand. The inscription shone in a tiny arc of lamplight. Time circles back. The wind eased. The rain thinned to a whisper. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard answered another step and then was still. She slept. In the morning, light found the edges of the curtain and made them glow. Morning brought a thin gold edge to the curtains, and the smell of coffee that had been kept warm. Clara dressed in the blue work dress and braided her damp hair. When she stepped into the main room, Elias was at the table with a knife and a heel of bread. He had set out 2 tin cups and a pot that steamed. He looked at the watch she carried and then at her. He did not ask for it yet. He poured coffee and slid a cup to her. The rim was dented. The coffee was dark and tasted like a burned nut, but it cut through the fog in her head. He lifted his own silver watch and pressed the catch. The lid jumped and the wheel inside began to turn. Pins lifted and dropped on a small cylinder. The melody rose the same handful of notes she had heard on the porch. It threaded through the room and set the hairs on her arms to rise. Clara placed her watch on the table beside his. The cases were cousins. The engraving was finer on hers. The metal felt colder. He set his watch down and rested his finger on the lid of hers. He did not open it. His voice came low. "Where did you get that?" She kept her eyes on the rim of the cup. The truth went only so far and no farther today. "Philadelphia," she said. "A man came to our door once. He needed money. My father bought the watch. It sat in a drawer for years." She swallowed. "I wanted something of my own when I left." His gaze stayed on her face as if he was listening for the noise between her words. He nodded once and slid the watch back to her. "Keep it close," he said. He tapped the table. "Eat." He had fried eggs and cut cornbread and a jar of honey that tasted of clover. She ate because the body told her to. He ate because it was morning. That seemed to be enough reason for him. Outside, the light was clean after the night of rain. The ranch woke like a lung. The barn breathed. Birds quarreled in the cottonwoods. Elias pulled on his coat and showed her where the buckets were kept, and how to carry them with a shoulder yoke so the weight did not cut her hands. The creek that fed the irrigation ditch ran quick and cold. It made a sound like torn silk where it slid over stones. She filled a pail, and the cold climbed her wrists. Her palms burned and then went numb. Elias took the other side of the yoke when she lost her step. He did not comment. He lifted the pole back into its notch and set her feet again, and they walked the rest of the way in a rhythm that satisfied. He showed her the garden rows of dark soil that smelled sweet and a little sour. The rain had flattened some sprouts. He tilted them upright with 2 fingers. He said the names of plants without explanation and let her repeat them to herself until they were rooted. He showed her how to pitch hay to the 2 horses in the near stall. The mare Juniper blew into Clara's palm, and the warmth of breath surprised her. The horse's shoulder was solid, and the hair had a wax smell. Clara laid her hand on the strong curve once, and felt her own breathing change. They moved to the workshop at the back of the barn. One section was orderly in a way that separated it from everything else. A table with a smooth maple top held a square, a set of calipers, a brass compass, and a pencil with its end sharpened to a needle. Plans rested in wooden tubes. On a shelf above a small metal model of a gate stood like a toy bridge. "What is this?" she asked, touching the model with one knuckle. "A diversion gate," he said. It was the most he had said in a row all morning. "The creek runs heavy in spring. You send part of it into the ditch and part back to the main channel. That way you water without drowning it." She nodded as if she had used the gate all her life. He watched her look at it, and his face eased for a breath. At noon she tried to cook beans and burn them and smoke the room until tears ran. He twisted the stove door wrapped in iron damper, and the smoke slowed. He tipped the burned top layer into the ash bin without a word and set the pot back for a slow simmer. "You needed less fire and more time," he said. She took the lesson and tasted the beans an hour later and annoyed herself by smiling. He saw and did not point it out. He let her roam the house while he split wood on the far side of the barn. In the study the air was dry and smelled of paper and graphite. She ran her finger along the row of spines. Mechanics of Fluids. Treatise on Timber Truss Design. Poems by Walt Whitman. She lifted the thin book and saw a page turned down. The line read, "I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass." The mark looked old, like it had been put there by someone who needed to circle the fact of air and light in a blade of green in order to remember it later. On the shelf, a frame lay face down, the hairline crack along its edge like a crooked river. She should have left it. Her hand tipped it before she could talk herself out of it. Inside sat a younger Elias, with a different set to his mouth. A woman with dark hair and steady eyes leaned against him. A boy of 4 or 5 sat on the woman's lap. The boy's grin was a piece of sunlight. Clara stared until the faces blurred. She placed the frame back exactly as she found it, and breathed in slow and careful until her ribs stopped aching. In the afternoon he saddled Juniper for her and his gelding coal for himself. The saddles smelled like oiled leather and old sweat. He checked her cinch and put her boot in the stirrup and steadied her knee when she swung over. His hand was there and gone. They rode the wagon track into town. The ground had a crust on it from the sun. A hawk hung over the lower pasture, its shadow a moving knife on the grass. They passed a stretch of split-rail fence that had been patched 3 different ways. Elias looked at that fence the way a man looks at his own handwriting. He said nothing and flicked the rein, and Cole shifted up into an easy trot. Ash Hollow had one street, and every building faced it. A bell hung above the general store and rang when the door opened. The telex office sat between a blacksmith and a print shop. The blacksmith hammered a shoe, and the ring ran down the street and settled in Clara's teeth. Heat came out of the forge, and the smell was iron and sweat and old hay. Inside the general store, Abel Pike stood behind the counter with his vest unbuttoned and his hair sticking up. The shelves behind him held sacks of flour jars of penny candy bolts of calico coils of rope. Abel's face split in a grin before they were 2 steps in. "Mercer," he said, "you bring the weather with you yesterday. Today you bring surprise. Afternoon, ma'am." "Clara," she said. "Whitmore." She hesitated, then added, "For now." Abel's grin sharpened, but he had the good grace not to turn it to words. "For now will do," he said. He leaned on the counter. "We got coffee that will walk on its own salt pork beans, lamp oil, and fabric enough to make a decent dress. Mr. Mercer keeps a short list, but I can write extra if the lady likes." Elias gave Abel a piece of paper with block letters. Abel scanned it and went to work. He bagged flour and counted beans with a scoop, the metal making a soothing scrape. From time to time he looked up to say something that was half news and half joke, the way storekeepers do when they are the town's bulletin and also its relief. "Telex keyed all morning," he said. "Denver wants timber. Bank is nervous. Crowell came in early wearing that coat that looks like a curtain. Brought his new foreman from the southern pasture. You seen him yet?" Elias placed his hand on the counter. "Who?" "Fella with a scar on his chin. Stands like he expects a fight every hour on the hour." Abel plunked a tin of coffee on the list. "Name of Buck Sutter." The bell over the door rang. The air that came in smelled like a different world, polished leather and bay rum and a sweet, medicinal note like wintergreen. A man in a dark suit crossed the floor, and the boards did not dare creak. His hair was white where it was not silver and held to his skull with intention. His eyes were pale. He took off his hat and smiled. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Abel." He looked at Clara last and let the silence say the introduction was on him. Silas Crowell, Abel said in a voice gone smaller. Afternoon, sir. Crowell touched the brim of his hat to Abel and then slid his gaze to Elias. The corners of his mouth looked kind until you saw how far they stopped from his eyes. I had not heard you were bringing company to town, he said. We do so love new faces in Ash Hollow. Elias shifted to stand a little between Crowell and Clara. The movement was simple and complete. This is Miss Whitmore, Elias said. He did not add from where or how or why she had appeared on his porch in a storm. Crowell held out a hand as if to be genial. Clara put her fingers in it for the smallest time she could and pulled them back. His palm was soft. Welcome, he said. Ash Hollow is the sort of place where neighbors matter. You will find me neighborly. Thank you, she said. Behind Crowell, a man took up a place near the end of the counter. He was tall and rangy and had a scar that pulled his chin down on one side. His hands rested empty, but not relaxed. He did not look like someone who had grown up in a town. Crowell did not look back at him. He did not have to. Do call on me at the bank when you find the time, Crowell said to Clara. We have many solutions for new beginnings. We are only buying beans, Elias said. Crowell smiled wider. Solutions often start with beans. The rest arrives in due course. He put his hat back on his head. Abel, send my order to the house. Sutter, come. Buck Sutter did not touch his hat. He turned and followed Crowell out into the light. Elias let out a small breath through his nose as if he had been holding it without notice. Abel stacked the rest of the goods and tied them off with twine. Miss Whitmore, Abel said. If you ever decide on a dress pattern, Hester Hale is the woman you want. Her stitches look like machine work, and she is as stubborn as a mule with a mind of its own. As luck has it, I am right behind you, a voice said. A woman stepped through the door with a basket on her arm and her gray hair braided like rope around her head. Her face was cut fine and quick. Her eyes saw everything in one pass and kept the good parts. Hester, Abel said with relief and affection mixed. We were speaking of you. No doubt, she said. She faced Clara and nodded once. I am Hester Hale. You are the one who had the sense to knock on the right door last night. Welcome. Thank you, Clara said. Hester looked from Clara to Elias and back. You will come to supper tomorrow at my place, she said. It was not a question. I expect no fuss and no excuses. I am a better cook than Abel is a grocer, and that is saying something. Abel pretended to be bruised. I am widely known to be the best grocer in 3 counties. You are the only grocer in this county, Hester said. She touched Clara's arm for a beat. 6 o'clock. The cottage with the hollyhocks. Elias opened his mouth. Hester lifted her basket higher and cut across him without raising her voice. 6, she said again. It saves us both time if you simply agree. Elias closed his mouth and nodded. On the way out, Abel slid Clara a little paper sack with a single piece of candy in it and a look that said it was for luck. Outside, the sun had warmed the plank walk. Flies built a slow cloud over the horse trough. From the telex office came the clatter of keys and the tiny bell that meant the wire was live. They rode back with their purchases tied to the saddles, and the day felt longer than it was. Clara kept one hand on the horn and one on the rein and found that her shoulders had stopped knotting against the motion. The valley smelled washed. The ditch glinted. Elias turned his head once to check her seat, and she grinned without meaning to. He looked away in a hurry, as if the sight of a smile was a thing that could unsteady a man. The next evening, the sky held a thin line of rose when they walked the path to Hester's cottage. Hollyhocks leaned against the wall like soldiers standing at ease. Hester's dinner table was small and set with plates that did not match, and a blue pitcher with a crack in the glaze. A pie cooled on the sill and smelled of cinnamon and butter. Somewhere in the house, a wall clock ticked a steady measure. They ate stew and fresh cornbread and wiped the bowls with bread. Hester kept the talk on crops and weather until the color left the sky. Then she set her spoon down and looked at Elias with a softness that had not been there before. There is something I have for you, she said. She stood and went to a shelf and took down a small wooden box with a lid that had been polished by years of being touched. She set it between them and lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon, and on top a single sheet of paper folded once. Hester touched the top envelope with 2 fingers. Lila sent these, she said, after the fire. Elias did not move. She and Owen got out, Hester said. They went out the back when the smoke went to the ceiling and the door jammed. She ran. She took the back alley and cut across the yard of the Cooper and kept running. She did not stop until she was outside town. She hid that night in the dry creek bed. She wrote me when she found a place. She begged me to keep quiet and to forgive her for not saying where. She was afraid my kitchen walls had ears. Clara kept her hands in her lap, her fingernails pressed half-moons into her palms. Hester passed the top letter to Elias. His hands did not touch hers. He took the paper and read, and the light in the room changed. There were more letters. Hester slid them to him one by one. The script was small and neat. It spoke of cheap rooms and a job sewing hems, and a boy who learned figures faster than anyone around him and asked for his uncle at night. Hester lifted the single folded sheet that lay apart. "This was with the first letter," she said. "I think it is Nathaniel's hand." Elias took the page. The letters were larger, written quick, as if the writer had been looking over his shoulder while he wrote. The date was 5 days before the fire. Reed came was in the original. Here it was Crowell. He read the note. Crowell had come 3 times that week. He had spoken names he had no right to. Nathaniel had sent Lila and the boy to Hester's for the night. He had written that he would hide the ledger where Crowell would not find it. If they had to run, they would run with a piece of proof. Elias placed the sheet back in the box like it was made of glass. He looked at Hester with eyes that did not belong to a man who had not slept. He tried for words. None came. Hester reached across and set her palm on his wrist. It was the first time Clara had seen anyone touch him that way. "I waited to give you this until I believed you could bear it," Hester said. "I wanted to tell you the day I got it. I did not. I am not proud of that." She took a breath. "I did not want you to go to Crowell's house and kill him in his parlor." Elias sat back. He looked older and younger in the space of a breath. Clara felt heat rise in her chest that was not anger and not relief. It was something like grief for a life that had been cut and could not be rejoined cleanly. The names on the pages made a small sound against her ribs. She had a name in her mouth that she could not say. Her father's name, Horace Whitmore. She lifted her glass and drank water to make the name sink. Hester retied the ribbon. She kept her hand on the lid for a moment before she closed the box. The clock on the wall ticked and the sound rolled out like a measure of something that could not be argued. "The last of her letters came last year," Hester said. "Winter, then nothing." Silence held, then the air in the room flicked at the edge. From the street, through the cracked window, came the crisp clack of the telex keys. The bell sounded and sounded again, small and bright in the dark. The clacking from the wire office did not stop. It came in small bursts like sleet on glass. Hester set a hand on the edge of the table and listened with her head tilted. A minute later, someone knocked. Abel stood in her doorway with his hat in his hands and a boy from the telegraph behind him. The boy held a strip of paper that looked like it could cut if you touched the edge wrong. "For you, Hester," Abel said. "Frank from the wire asked me to bring it. Thought you would be up." Hester took the strip and read, lips moving. She read it again. She looked at Elias with something fierce and tender at once. "From San Francisco," she said. "From a watchmaker. Lila passed in winter. The boy is with them. He is coming on Thursday by the afternoon stage. He has money for the fare. They say he remembers something from that night, and that his mother told him to tell you when he is safe." The room went still around the words. The pie on the sill cooled without smell. The clock kept time that did not belong to this kitchen. Elias spoke without lifting his eyes from the table. "He is coming here." "He is," Hester said. "He is all that is left that we can put our hands on." Abel shifted and cleared his throat and failed to find a joke in his pocket. He touched the brim of his hat and left. The wire boy followed, feet soft on the porch. Hester folded the strip and slid it into the wooden box with the letters. She closed the lid and pushed it toward Elias. "Take them," she said. "They are not mine to keep." He did not push it back. They walked home under a sky that had no storm left in it. The street was empty. A dog lifted its head and put it back down. Cole walked with his hoofbeats even and soft. The air smelled like wet dust and creosote and lard smoke from somewhere a street over. At the ranch, Clara lay awake a long time. She tried to fit the shape of a boy she had never seen into a place at a table she could see. She could hear the ditch in the dark, a long, low sound that made a floor in her mind. When sleep came, it came in a slide. Morning sharpened everything. Coffee hissed. Light pushed hard at the windows. Elias set the coffee pot down and nodded at the watch on the table in front of her. "Let me see it," he said. She put the silver case in his palm. He turned it once with his eyes on it like a man who reads the grain in a board. He pressed the catch and the lid jumped. The melody walked out and took hold of the air. He watched the pins lift on the cylinder. His mouth drew. He stopped the wheel with a finger. He peered under the lip of the plate and ran his thumbnail along the inner edge in a slow circle. "There," he said. He looked up at her. "Do you see this seam?" She bent in close. The base looked thicker than the other watch. The line was so fine she had not noticed it in all the time she had held the case. He took a penknife from his pocket. The blade clicked. He found the place where the seam hesitated and set the blade there with patience. The plate moved a hair. He tilted the watch, and a small square of paper no bigger than a nail fell into his palm. He did not open it at once. He rubbed his thumb along the fold to warm it, then eased it apart. The paper was thin, a bank draft. He held it by the corners so the oils in his fingers would not stain it. He read, "Payment authorized to Judge Horace Whitmore. Final payment, Mercer case. December 1869. The sound in the room went far away. The clock ticked from the hallway and did not slow or hurry. He lifted his eyes to Clara, and something in them had gone to ground. "Whitmore," he said. Clara did not reach for the paper. She could not have written her own name in that minute. "Horace Whitmore is my father," she said. Her voice had no tremor in it because there was nothing left in it to shake. Elias folded the paper and slid it back into its place in the case. He did not put the case down. He put the plate back and pressed until the seam closed true and the watch looked ordinary again. He handed it back to her and took his own hands away so that none of his skin touched hers. "You knew," he said. "I knew he had ruled for a man like Crowell," she said. "I did not know about this draft. I thought there might be something more. That is why I came west." "You came to my door with another name in your pocket," he said. "I did," she said. She kept her eyes on his. "I did not plan what happens at your table. I did not plan to eat from your bowl and care whether you sleep." He let that hang a long time. "I need time," he said. He stood and took the cups and washed them with a care that did not match the fact that they were tin and could be dented and would not mind it. He set them upside down to dry and took his hat from the peg by the door and left. Clara sat and did not move. The watch lay on the table with the lid closed. The room felt too neat. The blanket on the back of the chair was folded perfect and wrong. She stood and went to the study because the study had things that had belonged to hands. The desk held the brass compass and a pearl of lead on the end of a pencil. A smudge of graphite had the smear of a fingertip through it. She wanted to put her own finger there and refused herself that and put both hands on the edge of the desk until the urge passed. The tube with the stamp that read 1873 diversion gate leaned in the corner. She imagined the gate in water catching the light and sending some aside and letting some pass. Hoofbeats touched the yard. She went to the porch and saw Hester step down from a buggy with the box in her arms. Hester did not waste time on greeting. "I thought you might want the original wire for your own papers," Hester said. She handed Clara a folded copy and then looked into her face. "You look like a person who found proof and lost something for it." Clara set the copy on the table beside the watch. "He found a bank draft inside," she said. "Crowell to Horace. The last payment. He did not shout. I do not know if that is worse." "It is real either way," Hester said. She put the wooden box on the mantel next to the rifle. Men sometimes go outside to think because the air can hold some of the weight. He will come in when he has measured the load. Clara nodded. That felt true in the way a stone feels true underfoot. Hester touched the edge of the watch with one finger and then took her hand back like the case had heat. "Lila was proud of Nathaniel's work," she said. "Said he could make metal sing. Looks like he made metal talk too." "Do you think she suffered?" Clara asked before she could stop the words. Hester kept her eyes on the yard. "Winter took her," she said. "That is what the wire says. It is a soft thief when it is a long time coming. She held on until the boy was set with work and people who would see him through. That sounds like a woman who finishes what she can." Clara let that sit. The ditch made its long sound under the cottonwoods. Hester pulled on her gloves. "I will see you tonight," she said. "If you need a place to sit where the clock is kinder, you come to my kitchen." After she left, the house felt full of the sound of the ditch. Clara picked up the watch. She opened it and let the tune play. It rose like it always did and filled the air between the rooms. She pressed the stop and set the case down. Her hands were steady. Outside across the yard, Elias stood with his boots in the damp edge of the ditch. The wind worried at his coat. He held his own watch in his palm and did not open it. He looked at the water as if it was a page that could be read if you knew the language. The light put a white strip on the current and then took it away. He closed his hand and the watch vanished into his pocket. He turned and walked the fence line a post to a post with the patience of a man who has decided to use the day for the part of living that is work. Thursday came in clean and bright. The ditch shone like a strip of tin in the sun. Cole stood saddled before breakfast. Juniper tossed her head as if she had her own mind about the day. Elias checked the cinch twice, then once more, like a man who knew about failure and did not trust it to stay put. Clara tied a clean kerchief over her hair and tucked the silver watch into her pocket. The case made a cool circle on her thigh. She tasted metal on the air and dust already rising on the road. They rode side by side, not close and not far, the reins creaking and leather giving little sighs. A meadowlark called from the fence line, and the sound lifted everything for a breath. Ash Hollow looked smaller when you were coming toward it, and bigger once you were inside it. The bell over Abel's door rang once and then died. Hester waited near the stage platform in a clean dress and a shawl that had been darned neat. Her basket was empty this time. Her mouth was set like a seam. She nodded to them and said nothing. The three of them stood where the sun hit the boards and watched the road. The stage came around the bend at a trot and rattled over last week's ruts. Dust formed a veil and then slid away. The horses blew and stamped. The driver threw the brake and climbed down with a rope in one hand and the door latch in the other. He swung the door wide and men stepped out first. A drummer with a sample case, a farmer with a coat folded on his arm, then a boy. He had a small carpet bag and a hat too big for his ears. He set the bag down with care and looked up and around the way a boy looks when he is counting the shapes of a place and checking for exits. His hair was a stubborn brown. His eyes were a color you could not name until they were near. Hester moved first. She said his name, and the way she said it put something in the air that did not leave. Owen. He turned to her like he had been waiting for that sound. Mrs. Hale, he said. His voice was steady high and not high, the place between. Elias stepped forward and stopped with his boots set square. He bent down until his eyes were level with the boy's. The boy's face changed when he saw the shape of this man up close. He did not smile. He studied. He took a breath that looked like a decision. Uncle Elias, he said. Elias put his hand out and did not rush when the boy did not take it in the first heartbeat. Owen looked at the hand, then at his own, then put his palm there. Elias folded his fingers and the grip landed. You look like him, Elias said, and the words came out rough. So do you, Owen said, and that was the end of that. Clara kept her breath slow, and the day widened. She could feel the sting at the back of her eyes and refused it. Hester put a hand on Owen's shoulder, and it fit like it had been measured. Hungry, Hester said. It was not a question. Owen nodded in the short way boys nod when they know the right answer to a sensible thing. They turned toward the street, and the world shifted around them like an animal that had been pretending to sleep. Silas Crowell walked out from the shadow of the bank with his hat in his hand. Buck Sutter came 2 steps behind and to the side. Crowell's coat made a sound like a curtain catching when he moved. His smile was set in a polite shape. His eyes were cold. Mr. Mercer Crowell said, "What a fine day for a reunion, and for commerce." He turned the smile toward Owen. "And this must be the young gentleman I have heard about." Owen tucked closer to Elias without taking his hand away. He looked at Crowell like boys look at dogs that might bite and might not. He did not back down. "I know you," he said. He did not raise his voice. "My mother told me your name." Crowell's lids lowered a fraction and then returned to their polite place. He did not take his eyes off the boy while he spoke to Elias. "Children are full of stories," he said. "We are full of patience." Abel's door opened and shut behind them with a little slam that sounded like a man trying not to make a noise and failing. The blacksmith's hammer stopped and the air held its breath. The telex bell down the street ticked once, twice, and then fell silent. Elias did not move into Crowell and did not step back. He did not look at Buck. He looked at Crowell the way you look at a wall to see where you might put your hand for purchase. "This is family," he said. "Indeed," Crowell said. He put his hat back on, and the brim cut a slice of shade over his eyes, and business often follows family at a close distance. "Do come by the bank. There are matters to arrange." He turned. Buck did not. Buck stood a count longer and let his eyes pass over Owen's face in a way that made Clara's hands want to close. Then he followed his employer toward the bank's bright door. Hester let out a breath through her nose that sounded like she had been holding it a year. She slipped her hand into Owen's and started him across the street. "Come," she said, "I have lemonade and a kitchen table." Elias touched Owen's shoulder, and the 4 of them moved together. Heat rose from the planks. Flies bumped at the horse trough. The wire office door opened, and the boy from last night's errand stepped out and looked around until he found Hester. He trotted over with another strip of paper and handed it up without ceremony. "For Sheriff," he said, and pointed with his chin. Sheriff Amos Whitaker stood under the eave of his office with his hat pushed back and his thumb set hard in his belt. Hester passed the wire to the sheriff as they came near. He read it and folded it once, and did not look pleased to have it in his hand. He lifted his head and found Elias and did not raise his voice. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I need a word." They stepped into the shade. The sheriff tipped his hat at Owen, and the boy tipped his back without being told. Hester stood with her back to the wall like a woman who had seen her share of rooms where decisions were made and did not plan to be moved from this one. Clara stood inside the doorway and watched the men's faces. She watched Elias hold still and leave room for what he could not yet name. The sheriff held the wire in 2 fingers and looked like a man who wished the paper would erase itself and knew it would not. He said Elias's name again. He did not look at Crowell's bright door. He kept his eyes on the man in front of him and on the boy who had traveled alone to stand here. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you will want to hear this." Sheriff Whitaker held the strip of paper between forefinger and thumb. His other hand pressed flat to the door jamb like he meant to keep the building from drifting. "Crowell filed guardianship papers in California," he said. "Stamped and signed. Names himself guardian to the boy after his mother's death. Claims the boy ran off and was spirited here. He wants me to act at once." Elias did not look at the bank. He looked at Owen. The boy stood with Hester's hand around his. He did not pull away. The sheriff's jaw worked once. "I can hold off until morning while I verify the wire," he said. "It is the most I can give you without cutting my own badge into scraps. Crowell has men set on your path. They will not be shy." Hester gave the smallest nod. "We hear you." The sheriff stared down the street at the bank front. In the bright window, Crowell looked like a figure printed on a card. The sheriff flicked his eyes back. "Do not walk the boy past that door again today," he said. "If you think of something that will give me more weight, find it before sunup." He folded the wire and slid it into his vest. He looked at Owen, and his voice softened half a step. "You stay with Mrs. Hale," he said. "You eat, you rest. Let the grown folk carry this part." Owen nodded in that short way again. He said thank you like a boy who had learned the habit and not lost it. Hester got him across the street and through her gate. Clara watched through the open slats as the hollyhocks bent to make a corridor and the door closed around them. The house held. Elias set his hat down on the sheriff's desk and then set it down again the right way. He turned to Clara, and the look on his face had nothing of indecision in it. "Come," he said. They walked together with their eyes up. The street made space for them. Abel watched from his doorway and measured a roll of paper without looking at it. The blacksmith put his hammer down on the anvil and wiped his hands. He said nothing. Clara went ahead into the bright mouth of the photo studio. The bell on the door gave a silver click. Mr. Franklin peered up from behind his camera with his hair in a comb line down the middle and small glasses that had slid to the end of his nose. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, then caught himself. "Miss Whitmore, can I help you?" "I need your back room," Clara said, "now." His eyes jumped to the sheriff behind her, then to Elias, then back to her face. He pointed down the narrow hall without asking questions that would be waste. The darkroom smelled of developer and old egg. A red lamp bled color over trays and tongs. The curtain was heavy. Elias positioned himself behind it. The sheriff slipped through the side door that Mr. Franklin used for errands and would not show in a photograph. The air felt held. Clara stepped back into the street and found Buck Sutter leaning on a hitch rail like he had been born to that angle. He looked at her without moving a muscle in his face. "Mr. Crowell asked me to pass a message," she said. "He wants your word on the December arrangement." She kept her voice level and bored the way clerks at a counter sound when they have said the name of a file too many times. His eyes changed when she said the month. He straightened a little and looked past her at the photo studio sign. It turned once in the thin wind and showed a flaking painted camera. "What does he want?" Buck said. "He wants your mouth near my ear, not out in the street," she said. "Or his word is, you do not keep a mouth shut." Buck's chin lifted. Pride moved him. He followed her into the studio and down the narrow hall. His boots came down soft on the floorboards. He did not ask why a woman was carrying a bankman's message. He did not look for a trap. He went where his habit sent him. Inside the red light, his skin looked dark wine. He took off his hat and set it down on a stool. He did not sit. "All right," he said, "say it." Clara kept her gaze level. She held her hands at her sides because she did not want him to see them shake, and he did not deserve to see them steady. "There is a boy in town," she said. "He crossed state lines. He says he saw men pour lamp oil around a workshop and light it. He has one name. Sheriff will ask if that name belongs to you." Buck snorted. A child, he leaned in breathing wintergreen and old smoke. He saw nothing. "The woman got him out before we lit the back wall." Clara's eyes did not change. "And you went back to confirm a body." "Of course we went back," he said. "A job is done or it is not. Nathaniel Mercer was inside. He was still. We checked. We looked for a book he hid. We did not find it." He stopped. He seemed to hear himself for the first time. He reached toward his hat and then did not touch it. The air thickened and waited. Clara crossed to the curtain and brushed it with her hand. It moved. Sheriff Whitaker stepped through with his revolver already held low and steady. He did not raise his voice. "Buck Sutter," he said, "put your hands on the wall." Buck's mouth opened and shut. He looked at the gun, then at Elias, who had come out quiet. He searched for something to aim at and found none. He set his hands on the wall. The sheriff spoke soft and even while he fastened the cuffs. "You are under arrest for arson, for murder, for conspiracy. We will add what fits when the ink dries." Buck swung his head toward Clara with a stare that tried to mark her and slid off. "You have no proof," he said. The sheriff nodded toward the hall. Hester stood in the doorway with Owen's hand in her grip. The boy's face was pale and set. He took one step into the red light and looked up at Buck with the kind of look that makes grown men stop talking. "That is him," Owen said. "He said the oil would take fast. He dropped the match. He told another man to hold my mother if she came near the door." Buck looked down at the boy, and for a heartbeat his eyes were nothing. He turned back, and the mask slid into place. The sheriff clicked the cuff chain once to check it and led Buck out into the bright hall. Mr. Franklin flattened himself to the wall and lifted his hands as if a camera might blow if he touched it wrong. On the street, the sound of the cuffs found ears. Heads turned. Crowell appeared in the bank doorway with a soft smile, then saw who wore the irons, and the tidy line of his mouth shortened. "Sheriff," he said, "this is an outrage." The sheriff held Buck with one hand and the paper wire with the other. "This is a charge," he said. "Save outrage for your own parlor." Two deputies came around the corner at a quick walk and took Buck between them. The sheriff crossed to the bank and stepped inside. The door shut on the bright. A groan traveled from one end of the street to the other, and was not only from hinges. Clara stood with Hester and Owen. Elias stood on the other side of the boy. Abel drifted to Hester's fence and pretended to straighten a nail. The blacksmith kept his hammer on the anvil and waited. Minutes layered. When the door opened again, the sheriff came out with a ledger tucked under his arm that belonged to the bank and a calm on his face that read like a new map. Behind him, two more deputies held Silas Crowell by the elbows. Crowell tried to keep his posture and could not. "Silas Crowell," the sheriff said, "you are under arrest on suspicion of bribery, fraud, conspiracy, and any charge that tails those neatly. We will ride to the courthouse at first light." Crowell looked past the sheriff and set his eyes on Clara. They went flat and gave nothing. He turned them to Elias, and there was a pulse at his jaw like a wire under a plank floor. He did not speak again. He let the deputies take his coat and his pride and his hat. They walked him to the jail, and this time the street made room without moving its gaze. Abel's shoulders dropped. He blew out air through his lips. "Mercer," he called, and then his voice snagged. He waved and gave it up. Hester put her palm on Owen's hair. The boy leaned into it without looking away from the jail door. His eyes were dry. His knuckles were white. At Hester's table that night, the kitchen held them all. The pie was gone in 4 slices. The stew tasted better than it had at noon. The clock ticked. No one said a hard word. When Owen's eyes began to slow, Hester rose, touched his shoulder, and pointed him toward the cot she had made by the window. He lay down without argument. His hand found the edge of the quilt and tightened there once. Elias stepped into Hester's small front room and stood by the mantel. The wooden box sat there with the letters. Clara joined him. He kept his eyes on the fire. The heat had gone low and the coals showed their shapes. "You put yourself in front of that man," he said. "So did you," she said. He looked at her, and the lines around his mouth seemed lighter. "Bring your watch," he said. She took the silver case from her pocket. He opened his own. They pressed the catches together. The songs rose one voice and then another, a hair out of step that found each other and walked side by side before the teeth ran out. In the dim room, the notes made a space where a man could stand and breathe. In the morning, the town gathered at the courthouse. The room smelled like dust and paper. Collins from Silver Creek wore a collar that fought his neck and a face that tried to be no one's friend. The sheriff spoke in a level tone and laid out what he had to lay. Buck Sutter signed the statement Mr. Franklin had written down and stared at the floor while the pen scratched. He said 3 names. One was his own. He said who told him to strike the match. He said who paid the man who paid the judge. Clara stood behind Elias and watched the judge's eyes flick across the draft. Judge Whitmore's name sat on the paper like a stone in a field. Collins did not touch it with his finger. He nodded once that could have meant anything and set the paper aside. The room thinned to a quiet no one had planned. Hester moved her weight from one foot to the other and held her chin level. Abel crossed his arms and grounded himself with his feet wide. The boy in the telex office leaned in his doorway with his cap in his hands. Owen went to the front when the sheriff called him. He stood on the box that let him see over the rail and kept his hands flat. He answered the questions in words that did not swing. He said he had smelled oil and hot metal. He said the fire on the back wall crawled like a thing with a mind. He said a man with a scar on his chin had laughed when the smoke took the room in a gulp. He did not look at that man while he said it. He looked at the judge. When Owen stepped down, the clerk folded the paperwork and tied it with red twine. Collins cleared his throat and said enough to send Crowell to a cell with a lock that fit and a road that led to a territorial court. He voided the guardianship before the last word left his mouth. The door to the jail shut once more. The sound of it crossed the street and laid down. People let their shoulders breathe. A horse shook itself in its harness. The air shifted. They rode back to Juniper Ridge, with the sun lifting and the day stretching long. Hester waved from her gate and then went inside where she would keep a fire that did not bite. Abel held up a tin cup like a toast and then pretended he had not. The blacksmith took up his hammer again and hit the metal true. At the ranch, Clara carried the parcels while Owen counted fence posts from the saddle and beat time on his thigh. Cole flicked an ear and snorted when the boy's boot thumped. Elias listened to the rhythm and said nothing. In the yard, the light lay clean on the porch boards. The house looked like it had been built to sit in this square of land and had arrived at last. Juniper put her head over the stall door and pinned an ear at the sound of grain in a bucket. Owen went to her with a handful and she breathed at his palm like she had known him since spring. Clara set the watch on the table and hung up the blue dress she had not worn in Philadelphia. The fabric had softened where the waist had rubbed. The study door stood open. She went to the desk. Elias had set out a roll of paper there and a pencil and the brass compass. He stood next to the table with his hands on the edge, his sleeves pushed to the elbow. He unrolled the paper. Lines appeared clean and exact. A small bridge put itself together in pencil. 2 stringers. Planks laid side by side. Piers set into the ditch bank where the soil cut best. He measured, drew, erased, drew again. The pencil whispered. The compass scratched and traced. His hands moved like they had not for a long time. Owen came in quietly and stood on the other side and watched the bridge grow. His eyes had that open look boys get when a tool makes sense. Clara stood behind the two of them and breathed the smell of paper and graphite and coffee gone cold. Elias looked up at her, and the look had nothing of storm in it. "We will need dry cedar," he said. She nodded. She did not speak. He bent to the plan and put his weight behind the next line. Outside, the ditch moved. It licked the bank and traveled on. The house held the tick of the wall clock and the heat of the stove and the 2 watches resting quiet in their places. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.